Have you ever driven past a junkyard and wondered about all those badges you don't recognize? Names that used to mean something. Brands that families saved up for, that kids dreamed about, that once lined every main street in America. Well, they didn't just disappear overnight. They faded, slowly, quietly, and most people never even noticed. Today, we're counting down 25 forgotten American car brands that vanished in silence. Some were giants, some were rebels, and some were just flat out ahead of their time. If you're into cars, history, or just a good story about ambition gone sideways, hit that like button and subscribe, because this one's going to be a ride. Number 25, Crosley. So here's a fun one to start with. Powell Crosley Jr. was a radio and appliance magnate who decided in 1939 that Americans needed a tiny, affordable car. And we're talking tiny. The Crosley was barely 10 feet long and weighed about 1,000 pounds. It got 50 miles to the gallon back when nobody cared about fuel economy. The thing is, Crosley was actually ahead of his time. He introduced the first American car with disc brakes in 1949, years before anyone else thought it was a good idea. He also built the first American sports car, the Hot Shot, which actually won the first ever race at Sebring in 1950. But post-war America wanted big, powerful cars with chrome and fins. Nobody wanted to be seen in what looked like a motorized lunchbox. Crosley sold fewer than 75,000 cars total before shutting down in 1952. The irony? Decades later, the entire world would embrace exactly the kind of small, efficient car he was trying to sell. Number 24. Essex. Essex was Hudson's answer to the Ford Model T, launched in 1919 as one of America's first affordable enclosed sedans. Before Essex, if you wanted a car with a roof, you were paying luxury prices. Essex changed that overnight. The Essex coach cost barely more than an open-top touring car, and suddenly every American family could ride in comfort, rain, or shine. By the mid-1920s, Essex helped push Hudson to become the third largest automaker in America, selling over 300,000 cars in 1929 alone. The Essex coach was so successful, it essentially forced the entire industry to make closed cars affordable, reshaping the market permanently. But Hudson decided to rebrand Essex as the Terraplane in 1932, and just like that, one of the most important nameplates in automotive history vanished. Amelia Earhart promoted the Terraplane. Even gangster John Dillinger reportedly preferred them for quick getaways. But the Essex name? Gone. Absorbed and forgotten, despite having transformed the industry. Number 23. Kaiser Frazer. Right after World War II, automobile executive Joseph Frazer and industrialist Henry Kaiser teamed up with a bold idea. While the Big Three were still selling warmed-over pre-war designs, Kaiser Frazer introduced the first completely new post-war American car. And it sold like crazy at first. In 1947 and 48, they moved hundreds of thousands of units out of a massive former bomber plant in Willow Run, Michigan. The problem? Kaiser and Frazer couldn't agree on anything. Frazer wanted conservative production numbers. Kaiser wanted to flood the market. They split in 1951, and the brand started its death spiral. Kaiser eventually bought Willys Overland and picked up the Jeep brand, then moved operations to Argentina and Brazil. By 1955, Kaiser Frazer was completely gone from the American market. But here's the kicker. Their purchase of Willys meant they saved the Jeep, which would pass through multiple owners and eventually become one of the most iconic vehicle brands in the world. Not a bad legacy for a company most people have never heard of. Number 22. Eagle. Eagle is one of those brands that most people under 40 have never heard of. Chrysler created it in 1988 after buying American Motors Corporation, essentially as a replacement for the AMC badge. Eagle models were interesting, actually. The Eagle Talon was a genuine sports car, basically a twin of the Mitsubishi Eclipse. The Eagle Vision was a solid, well-regarded full-size sedan, and the Eagle Premier actually pioneered the cab-forward design that would later make the Dodge Intrepid famous. But Chrysler never really committed to giving Eagle its own identity. Most models were rebadged versions of cars you could get from other Chrysler brands, and consumers knew it. Why buy an Eagle when you could get essentially the same car with a Dodge or Plymouth badge for the same money? The brand limped along for just 10 years before Chrysler pulled the plug in 1998. Eagle remains one of the shortest-lived and most completely forgotten experiments in American automotive history. Number 21. Willys Overland. In 1912, Willys Overland was the second best-selling car company in America, right behind Ford. Let that sink in. They were outselling General Motors. John North Willys was a born salesman from upstate New York who started in the bicycle business before turning to automobiles. He bought the struggling Standard Wheel Company in Toledo, Ohio in 1908 and transformed it into a national powerhouse, producing over 142,000 cars in 1916 alone. The Overland was more expensive than the Ford Model T, but had a better reputation for quality. But Willys overextended, buying too many companies during the boom years. The Depression nearly killed them. They went bankrupt and were reorganized in 1936. Then came their greatest contribution. During World War II, Willys built roughly 330,000 military Jeeps that helped win the war. After the conflict, Willys focused on civilian Jeeps and small cars, but couldn't compete with the Big Three's volume. Kaiser Motors bought them in 1953. By 1963, the Willys name vanished completely, absorbed into Kaiser Jeep. Number 20. Edsel. The Edsel might be the most famous failure in automotive history. Ford spent $250 million developing it, roughly $2.7 billion in today's money. Named after Henry Ford's only son, the Edsel was supposed to fill the gap between Ford and Lincoln. It launched in September 1958 with massive hype and its own television special. Ford predicted it would sell 400,000 units in its first year. It sold barely 63,000. So what went wrong? Well, everything. The distinctive horse-collar grille was polarizing. The Teletouch push-button transmission in the steering wheel hub confused drivers and often malfunctioned. Internal politics meant the Edsel was competing with Ford's own Mercury line in the same price bracket. And the timing was devastating, launching right into the recession of 1957 that crushed the mid-price market. Ford killed the Edsel in 1959 after just 3 model years. The name became synonymous with corporate hubris, and Ford executives reportedly avoided mentioning it for decades afterward. Number 19. DeSoto Walter Chrysler created DeSoto in 1928 to compete in the mid-price market, positioned just below the Chrysler brand, and it started strong. The first DeSoto, the Model K, sold over 81,000 units in its first 12 months on the market, a sales record for a new brand that stood for decades. Through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, DeSoto was a solid, respectable brand with loyal customers. But then Chrysler made a fatal error. They acquired Dodge, which occupied almost exactly the same market position. Suddenly, DeSoto was redundant, squeezed from above by Chrysler and from below by Dodge, with nowhere to breathe. Sales collapsed by over 60% in 1958, partly due to the recession, and Chrysler announced DeSoto's death in late 1960. The timing was brutally awkward. They made the announcement just about a month after introducing the 1961 models. Some dealers had brand-new DeSotos sitting on their lots that they couldn't move even at steep discounts. 33 years of loyal customers, abandoned practically overnight. Number 18. Nash. Charles W. Nash was a former president of General Motors who left to start his own company in 1916. And he built something genuinely special. Nash cars had a reputation for being sturdy, well-engineered, and good value. They pioneered several innovations that other manufacturers wouldn't adopt for years, including one of the first integrated heating and ventilation systems and among the first production cars to use unibody construction. The Nash Rambler, which debuted in 1950, was essentially America's first successful compact car, proving there was a market for smaller, more efficient vehicles long before the fuel crises of the 70s. But Nash simply couldn't compete with the massive scale of the Big Three. In 1954, Nash merged with Hudson to form American Motors Corporation. George Romney, who would later become governor of Michigan and father of future Senator Mitt Romney, took over AMC and quickly realized the Nash and Hudson names were fading in the public consciousness. By 1957, both brands were gone, replaced entirely by the Rambler nameplate. Number 17. Hudson was once one of America's most beloved and innovative automakers. Founded in Detroit in 1909, the company was named after department store magnate Joseph Hudson, who helped finance the venture. By 1929, Hudson was the third largest car company in the country, producing over 300,000 vehicles. Their Essex companion brand had made affordable enclosed cars a reality for middle-class families. But Hudson's real claim to fame came after the war. They introduced the revolutionary step-down design in 1948, placing the passenger compartment down between the frame rails instead of on top of them. This gave the car an incredibly low center of gravity and handling that was generations ahead of the competition. The Hudson Hornet dominated NASCAR racing in the early 1950s, winning the championship in 51, 52, and 53. But Hudson made a fatal misstep by investing in the compact jet instead of developing a modern V8 engine. That single decision sealed their fate. The merger with Nash in 54 bought them a few years, but the Hudson name was retired in 1957. Number 16. Packard. Few names in American automotive history carry as much prestige as Packard. James Ward Packard founded the company in Warren, Ohio, after being disappointed with a car he bought from Winton, believing he could build something better. He was right. Packard became the gold standard of American luxury, rivaling and sometimes surpassing Rolls-Royce in reputation. Presidents, foreign dignitaries, and Hollywood stars all rode in Packards. During World War II, Packard built the Merlin engines that powered P-51 Mustang fighter planes, helping win the air war over Europe. But after the war, Packard made the controversial decision to move down market into the mid-price segment, which fatally diluted their luxury image. Then came the disastrous 1954 merger with Studebaker. Studebaker's financial problems were far worse than Packard had been led to believe, and the combined company hemorrhaged money. The last true Packards, built in Detroit with Packard-designed engines and bodies, came off the line in 1956. The 1958 models were nothing more than rebadged Studebakers that enthusiasts mockingly dubbed Packard-bakers. It was a humiliating end for what many considered America's finest automobile. Number 15. Studebaker. The Studebaker brothers started as blacksmiths and wagon builders in South Bend, Indiana, in the 1850s. They built wagons for the Union Army during the Civil War, supplied covered wagons for the Western migration, and by 1908 had become the third largest automaker in the world. Think about that timeline. A company that started making horse-drawn wagons for pioneers ended up building some of the most beautiful automobiles of the 20th century. The 1953 Starliner, designed by the legendary Raymond Loewy, is still considered one of the most stunning American cars ever made. But Studebaker couldn't survive the brutal price wars between Ford and GM in the 1950s. Labor costs at their South Bend plant were among the highest in the industry, and management couldn't bring them down. The merger with Packard in '54 made things worse, not better. Production limped along, eventually moving to Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, in 1963. The last Studebaker, a turquoise and white 1966 cruiser, rolled off that Canadian assembly line on March the 17th. 114 years of American manufacturing history, ending not with a bang, but with a quiet shutdown thousands of miles from home. Number 14. Rambler. After Nash and Hudson disappeared into American Motors Corporation, the Rambler nameplate became AMC's identity, and for a while it worked brilliantly. George Romney positioned the Rambler as the sensible alternative to Detroit's bloated land yachts. The Rambler American and Rambler Classic were affordable, fuel-efficient, and well-built. Motor Trend named it Car of the Year in 1963. Romney's pitch was straightforward. Why buy a dinosaur when you could buy the future? And millions of Americans agreed. By the early 60s, AMC had become genuinely profitable on the strength of the Rambler name alone. But the market shifted hard. Muscle cars roared in, and sensible compacts were suddenly deeply uncool. AMC tried to pivot with sportier models like the Javelin and AMX. But the Rambler name had become permanently associated with your grandfather's practical sedan. In 1969, AMC dropped the Rambler brand in favor of its own corporate name. The car that literally saved AMC from extinction had become an identity they were desperate to shake. Number 13. American Motors Corporation. AMC itself deserves a spot on this list. Born from the 1954 merger of Nash and Hudson, it was the largest corporate merger in American history at that time. AMC was always the underdog, the scrappy little company fighting the big three with a fraction of their resources. And sometimes they punched well above their weight. The Javelin and AMX were legitimate muscle cars. The Gremlin, despite its unfortunate appearance, was a clever and early answer to the fuel crisis. The Pacer was weird, but innovative. And the Eagle, introduced in 1980, was essentially the first crossover vehicle combining car-like comfort with genuine all-wheel drive capability years before anyone else attempted it. But AMC could never generate enough revenue to fund the constant cycle of new models that consumers demanded. French automaker Renault bought a controlling stake in the early 80s, and in 1987, Chrysler swooped in and bought the entire company. But not for the cars, not for the factories, for one thing only: the Jeep brand. Everything else AMC had built over 33 years was simply discarded. Number 12. Plymouth Chrysler created Plymouth in 1928 specifically to take the fight to Chevrolet and Ford at the entry level. And for decades, the strategy worked beautifully. Plymouth's affordable cars helped Chrysler survive the Great Depression when other companies were folding left and right. By August 1934, they'd already built their 1 millionth car, purchased by the same man who bought the very first Plymouth. The 60s brought Plymouth's greatest chapter. The Barracuda beat the Mustang to market by 2 weeks. The Roadrunner was the muscle car for the everyman. The Duster and Cuda became drag strip legends, but badge engineering in the 1980s and 90s completely destroyed Plymouth's identity. Every single Plymouth model became just a rebadged Dodge or Chrysler with nothing unique to distinguish it. And here's the ultimate irony. Chrysler designed the retro-styled PT Cruiser and the hot rod-inspired Prowler specifically to revitalize the Plymouth brand. But executives decided at the last minute to keep both cars for Chrysler instead. Plymouth was shuttered in 2001, literally robbed of the products that were supposed to save it. Number 11. Mercury. Mercury was Edsel Ford's brainchild, created in 1938 as a stylish bridge between the affordable Ford and the luxury Lincoln. For over 70 years, Mercury occupied that middle ground in America's automotive landscape. In the 40s and 50s, Mercuries became the preferred car of hot rodders. James Dean drove a Mercury in Rebel Without a Cause. In the 60s, Mercury had genuine sporting identity with the Cougar, Cyclone, and Comet. The Grand Marquis became a staple of American roads for decades, but over time, Mercury became increasingly indistinguishable from Ford. Every Mercury was essentially a Ford with a different grille, slightly more chrome, and a slightly higher price tag. By the 2000s, a Mercury Sable was functionally identical to a Ford Taurus. Ford dealers openly struggled to explain why anyone should pay more for a Mercury. The brand limped along until 2010, when Ford finally pulled the plug, choosing to focus all resources on the Ford and Lincoln names. After 72 years, Mercury just quietly faded from dealer lots, and hardly anyone noticed it was gone. Number 10. Pontiac. If there's a brand on this list that still genuinely stings for car enthusiasts, it's Pontiac. General Motors founded it in 1926 as a sub-brand of Oakland, one of its lesser divisions. But Pontiac quickly outsold the parent brand, and by 1932, Oakland was dead while Pontiac thrived. Then came the golden era. The GTO, introduced in 1964, is widely considered the car that launched the entire muscle car era: the Firebird, the Trans Am, the Grand Prix, the Judge. Pontiac's motto was "We build excitement," and for decades they delivered on that promise. But the 90s saw Pontiac swallowed by General Motors bureaucracy. Badge engineering turned Pontiacs into rebadged Chevrolets with different plastic cladding. When the 2008 financial crisis crushed GM, the company needed to slash brands to survive. Pontiac was sacrificed to appease Congress during bailout negotiations. The last Pontiac, a white G6, rolled off the assembly line in 2010, a brand that once defined American automotive excitement, traded away in a political negotiation. Number 9. Oldsmobile. Here's a fact that should stagger you. Oldsmobile was the oldest surviving American car brand when it died. Founded by Ransom Eli Olds in 1897, it predated Ford, Cadillac, Chevrolet, and virtually every other name you know. And Olds wasn't just another car company. He pioneered the first automotive assembly line years before Henry Ford gets the credit. Oldsmobile introduced the first fully automatic transmission, the first overhead valve V8 engine, the legendary Rocket, the first production turbocharged engine, the first front-wheel drive personal luxury car, the groundbreaking Toronado. At its peak in the early 80s, Oldsmobile was the third best-selling brand in all of America, behind only Chevrolet and Ford. But badge engineering in the 90s turned Oldsmobiles into warmed-over Chevrolets with slightly different sheet metal. GM tried a rebranding campaign with the slogan, "It's not your father's Oldsmobile," which ironically told their core customers they weren't wanted anymore. Sales cratered. The last Oldsmobile, a Burgundy Alero, came off the line on April 29, 2004. 107 years of continuous production and innovation erased. Number 8. Saturn was supposed to be General Motors' answer to Toyota and Honda. Launched in 1985 with nearly $5 billion in startup investment, it was genuinely revolutionary. Saturn had its own dedicated factory in Spring Hill, Tennessee, its own engineering team, its own dealer network, with no haggle pricing that customers absolutely loved. The cars featured dent-resistant polymer body panels and were marketed as a different kind of car company. Sales staff clapped when buyers drove off the lot. In 1994, Saturn invited all of its customers to a homecoming celebration at the factory, and thousands of people actually drove from across the country to attend. It was unprecedented. A car brand had created a genuine community, but GM grew impatient and resentful. Other divisions complained about the billions being funneled to Saturn. Slowly, Saturn's hard-won independence was stripped away. Unique Saturn-engineered cars gave way to rebadged Opels and generic GM platform vehicles. The magic evaporated. By 2009, when Roger Penske tried to buy the brand, and give it new life, the deal fell through. Saturn was killed during GM's bankruptcy restructuring, a victim of the very corporate thinking it was created to escape. Number 7. Hummer. The Hummer story is pure Americana at its most excessive. It started as the military Humvee, a massive, nearly indestructible vehicle built by A.M. General to go anywhere and survive anything. When A.M. General started selling civilian versions in 1992, they became instant status symbols. Arnold Schwarzenegger famously owned multiple Hummers and was instrumental in convincing the company to build the civilian version. Rappers featured them in music videos. They were the ultimate expression of American excess and confidence. General Motors bought the brand in 1999 and released the smaller H2 and H3 to broaden the customer base. But when gas prices spiked and environmental consciousness grew, Hummer became a lightning rod. It represented everything critics believed was wrong with American car culture. Fuel economy was measured in gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. During GM's 2008 bankruptcy proceedings, they tried to sell Hummer to a Chinese company, but Chinese regulators blocked the deal, recognizing that the gas-guzzling brand was doomed. Hummer was officially shuttered in 2010. The name has since been revived as an electric vehicle under the GMC umbrella, but that original standalone brand, the one that defined an era of American swagger, is gone forever. Number 6. Tucker Preston. Tucker's story reads like a Hollywood script, which is fitting because Francis Ford Coppola turned it into exactly that in 1988. Tucker was a brilliant promoter and genuine automotive visionary who, in 1946, announced he was building the car of tomorrow. The Tucker 48 was extraordinary. It featured a rear-mounted flat-six engine originally designed for helicopters, a center Cyclops eye headlight that turned with the steering wheel to illuminate curves, a padded dashboard decades before safety was a selling point, a pop-out windshield designed to eject safely during a crash, and disc brakes. All of this in 1948, when the Big Three were still selling warmed-over pre-war designs. The car was gorgeous, fast, and genuinely revolutionary. But Tucker could only build 51 cars before the Securities and Exchange Commission launched an investigation into his stock sales. He was acquitted of all charges in January 1950. The jury called the trial a farce, but it didn't matter. The factory was closed. The company was finished. The negative publicity had destroyed everything. Tucker died in 1956 at just 53 years old, working on a new car project in Brazil. Today, 47 of those original 51 Tuckers still exist, and they're among the most valuable collector cars in the world. Number 5. Cord Errett Laban. Cord was one of the most ambitious and flamboyant figures in American automotive history. By his mid-30s, he controlled a staggering empire that included Auburn Automobiles, Duesenberg, Cord Cars, Lycoming Engines, Stinson Aircraft, Checker Motors, and American Airways. The Cord L29, introduced in 1929, was the first front-wheel drive American production car. Stylish and innovative, but underpowered and expensive. Then came the car that would secure Cord's place in history forever. The Cord 810, unveiled at the 1935 New York Auto Show, caused such a sensation that attendees stood on the bumpers of neighboring cars just to catch a glimpse. Designed by the legendary Gordon Bierig, it featured hidden pop-up headlights, the first ever on any production car, a coffin-nose grille that eliminated the traditional radiator shell entirely. No running boards. A semi-automatic transmission. The styling was so revolutionary that the Museum of Modern Art selected it for exhibition, and American Heritage magazine would later call it the single most beautiful American car ever made. But early mechanical problems plagued the semi-automatic transmission. Only about 3,000 were built before the entire Auburn-Cord-Duesenberg empire collapsed in 1937. The 810 was the last American front-wheel drive car for nearly 30 years. Number 4. Auburn. Auburn is the forgotten sibling in the Auburn-Cord-Duesenberg triumvirate, and that's deeply unfair. Founded in 1900 in Auburn, Indiana, the company was struggling badly when young E.L. Cord took over in 1924 at just 29 years old. Cord found a warehouse full of unsold cars, personally redesigned them with fresh paint and new upholstery, and sold every last one. He then transformed Auburn from a moribund brand into a symbol of American speed and style. The 1935 Auburn 851 Speedster, with its iconic boat-tail design and a supercharged Lycoming straight-8 engine, could top 100 miles per hour right off the showroom floor, and it cost under $2,000. Every single one came with a dashboard plaque certifying it had been personally tested at over 100 miles per hour by racing legend Ab Jenkins at the Bonneville Salt Flats. Auburn was the volume brand that kept the Cord empire financially viable, while the more glamorous Cord and Duesenberg grabbed headlines and prestige. But when the empire crumbled in 1937, Auburn went down with the ship, leaving behind some of the most achingly beautiful cars of the pre-war era. Number 3. Duesenberg. If you've ever heard someone say, "It's a doozy," you're actually referencing a car brand. Duesenberg was the absolute pinnacle of American luxury, the car that out-Rolls-Royced Rolls-Royce. Founded in Indianapolis by German immigrant brothers Fred and August Duesenberg, the company started in racing and dominated. They won the Indianapolis 500 4 times in 1922, 24, 25, and 27. Their cars were the first American vehicles to win a European Grand Prix. But it was the Model J, unveiled in 1928, that redefined what an American automobile could be. Its straight-8 engine produced 265 horsepower, more than double the output of any other American car. Gary Cooper and Clark Gable owned custom Duesenbergs and famously raced each other through the Hollywood Hills. Al Capone, Howard Hughes, Greta Garbo, and European royalty all owned them. A bare Duesenberg chassis cost $8,500, when the average American doctor earned less than $3,000 a year. The supercharged SJ could reach 140 miles per hour in the 1930s when most cars couldn't hit 80, but the Great Depression destroyed the luxury market, and the company was dissolved in 1937. In 2018, Gary Cooper's SSJ sold at auction for $22 million. Not bad for a brand most people today have never heard of. Number 2. LaSalle. LaSalle is arguably the most historically important forgotten car brand in America. General Motors created it in 1927 as a companion brand to Cadillac, designed to fill the price gap between Buick and the top of the GM lineup. What makes LaSalle significant goes far beyond the cars themselves. The LaSalle was designed by a young man named Harley Earl, who had been styling custom car bodies for Hollywood celebrities in Los Angeles. GM brought Earl to Detroit, and his work on the LaSalle was so impressive that Alfred Sloan created an entirely new department just for him, the Art and Color section. This was the birth of automotive styling as a profession. The idea that a car should be visually beautiful and emotionally appealing, not just mechanically functional, changed the entire global automobile industry forever. Every modern car owes something to what Harley Earl started with the LaSalle. The cars sold well through the late 20s, but the Depression hammered the mid-luxury segment. By the late 30s, Cadillac had introduced lower-priced models that directly invaded LaSalle's territory. Why buy a LaSalle when you could tell your neighbors you owned a Cadillac for nearly the same price? GM discontinued LaSalle in 1940. The brand that literally invented automotive design as a discipline, completely forgotten. Number 1. Pierce Arrow. Pierce Arrow might be the most prestigious American car brand that virtually nobody alive today remembers. Based in Buffalo, New York, Pierce Arrow was building world-class luxury automobiles before Cadillac even existed as a brand. They were the official White House vehicle for multiple presidents, including William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, and Warren Harding. The cars were engineering masterpieces built to extraordinary standards. Pierce Arrow's headlights were famously integrated directly into the tops of the front fenders, a signature design element so distinctive that no other manufacturer dared copy it. The company simply refused to cut corners, even when it meant losing money. They employed some of the finest engineers and craftsmen in the industry and insisted on using only the highest quality materials. During the 1920s, a Pierce Arrow cost as much as a Duesenberg and was considered its equal in prestige and quality, and possibly its superior in refinement. Studebaker bought Pierce Arrow in 1928, hoping to add a luxury division to their lineup, but they couldn't make the financial numbers work during the Depression. Pierce Arrow regained its independence in 1933, but the luxury market had been devastated. They struggled on for 5 more years, building increasingly beautiful but unsellable cars. The last Pierce Arrow rolled off the line in Buffalo in 1938. Today, the name is virtually unknown outside of serious collector circles, making Pierce Arrow perhaps the most unjustly forgotten automobile company in all of American history. A brand that served presidents and defined luxury, erased from public memory. And there you have it, 25 forgotten American car brands that vanished in silence. Some were killed by bad timing, some by bad management, some by corporate politics, and some were simply too good, too innovative, or too ambitious for a world that wasn't ready for them. Which of these brands surprised you the most? And which one do you think most deserved a second chance? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this trip through America's automotive graveyard, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the stories most people have forgotten. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.